10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Yes, we're in Standard Time. We're not in daylight. I had to think it through there. We're glad you've tuned in again with us. Glad you've joined us like you've done for the past several months, actually. As we wait for 10 o'clock to roll around and for everyone else to join, since some are waiting till right at 10 to get there, I will remind everyone of the important announcements for the week. So don't forget that this Sunday, we will be meeting indoors for the first time in a couple months here. There's a limited space. We only have room for 60 people. So it's a first come, first serve situation. So if you have yet to register to come and join us indoors, we encourage you to check out the link tree. You'll find that indoor registration. But even if you are coming or not coming to the morning, we still encourage you to come in the afternoon for our afternoon service, which will be outdoors. Outdoors, we get 200 people. So our entire church family could be there, and we could all bring a guest, and we would still have space. But we would love to see you come to the outdoor service as well. And our outdoor service, because it's Valentine's Day when we're meeting, we're going to be centered around the theme of love. And then we're also asking everyone who comes to do is to bring some Valentines to give to the children of our church. So we've communicated out with the families that have younger children. And so we'll have between 16 and 20 kids that'll be at the service with their families. We'll be all combined for the entire time. And so we're asking you to come with some Valentines to give out, little cards. If you want to include a prepackaged snack, a little treat for them, the kids will love it. Trust me, I know. My kids love their candy and treats. But we would love to see you come on out, encourage our families, give a little physical, tangible expression of love. It's a good teaching opportunity for all of those children. And I know it'll mean a lot to the families as well to know that their kids are so loved by our church family. So that service is at 2:30 in the afternoon. It'll be outside. Please register. Join us there. Join us in the morning inside if you can. If not, you can find us on the live stream like always, 10 a.m. We're looking forward to gathering together again as a body and worshiping our Lord together as well. We've passed the 10 o'clock mark, so I think we can officially start. I should pull this up. I won't pull it up. I'll save it. But I would like for you to think, you there that are watching at home. I don't know who's watching. I can't see any names, faces, so on and so forth. But I want you to consider what is one of the most adventuresome endeavors that you have undertaken in your life. Some of the craziest things that you've done as you look back on the history of your life, something that stands out. And particularly, think of in maybe the recent years. What's the most adventuresome or unique or exciting thing that you have done in the past few years? I am going to share with you, where'd I go? There it is. An adventure that I've never undertaken, and I don't know if I ever will, is the activity of skydiving. I have friends who've gone skydiving. I know people who've gone skydiving. They all say it's great, it's exciting. Personally, I think I'd rather skydive before I bungee jumped. I, for some reason, trust the parachute more than I trust that rope. And seeing the rocks below me, I think, would just be a little more intimidating. However, I bring up skydiving because I did just a quick little online search for the oldest skydiver. Top hit is a story of a woman in Australia who in 2018 was when the thing was given. In 2018, she became the world's oldest skydiver. I don't think she's been usurped yet. And I can also say with, I think, 100% confidence that there's no one watching this that can usurp her record yet either. Because this woman, Irene O'Shea, went skydiving at the age of 102. I don't have the picture here. I'd show you the picture of her, but she's flying tandem, so she's got the instructor over there and she's strapped in as well. But at 102 years old, she went 14,000 feet up into a plane and jumped out of it and parachuted her way to the ground. And the funny thing is, I don't know if it's funny or not, but that wasn't her first time. So she's done parachuting before. Don't think she's that crazy. I mean, she didn't jump out of a plane for the first time at the age of 102. No, don't worry. She was very, very well practiced and well versed in skydiving, because she started skydiving at the young age of 100. So when she turned 100, her big celebration for becoming a centenarian was to go skydiving. And then every year on her birthday, between then and 2018, I'm guessing she passed away, she went skydiving again. And she did it to raise money. But that is mind-boggling. I cannot fathom anyone 100 years old skydiving, 101, 102. But sure enough, this woman, in her old age, went and did such a crazy adventuresome activity. Now, the reason I talk about these crazy adventures is because the individual that we're looking at today, we're going to look at the events of his life and the things that he accomplished in his old age. Now, he was not 102 when he underwent these activities. He was much younger. But still, he was an older man. An old man, I think I can safely say. It's always risky when you're the younger guy saying things are old, because then, it's a little relative. But I think I can safely say old. And if I'm wrong, you can correct me later. Now, unlike the last two individuals who were who are a lot more obscure individuals, you've heard their names in passing perhaps, or in adjacent stories. This individual, you're more familiar with his name, but you might not be quite as familiar with this account of his life. So the individual that we're looking at this morning is Caleb. Now, when you hear the name Caleb, I think you instinctively go back to the 12 men went to spy out Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. And you think all the way back to Numbers 13 and 14, when Moses sent the 12 spies into the land of Canaan, and it was only the 2 spies that brought back a good report, Joshua and Caleb. And for the most part, I think a lot of our Bible stories and teaching, that's where we leave Caleb. We leave Caleb as the good spy who came back with Joshua and who gave a good report and tried to get the Israelites to enter the land, but was rejected. And then the story moves on. Well, we're going to look at Caleb, but towards the end of his life. Because even though we have that moment of boldness and courage in young Caleb's life, when we get to the end of his life, we see something very similar as well. Now, just in case you're wondering how much later we're talking 45 years after the events of Numbers 13 and 14. So after Caleb went into the land of Canaan, spied it out, the events that we're going to look at today occur 45 years later. And our passage will actually give us the exact age of Caleb, which is convenient. But consider this. We just want to walk you through, just try to set the stage, and consider the life that Caleb lived. We can start all the way at Caleb's young years, where Caleb was born in Egypt and born into slavery. And he witnessed all the miracles of Egypt. And he witnessed Moses leading the nation of Israel through the Red Sea. And he witnessed everything that occurred. And then he was called upon by Moses to be one of these spies and to represent the tribe of Judah. And so he went and did his endeavor. And then he and Joshua were the 2 spies who, of all the rest of the nation of Israel, below them, all the normal people, I don't want to say, because Moses gets look at the past too, but he was one of the few that was actually going to be able to see the promised land, enter the land of Canaan. And we read about various events that occurred during those 40 years of wilderness wandering, and you have to remember that Caleb was involved. So Caleb was there eating manna every day. He was used to that diet. Caleb was there when Korah, led his rebellion, when he tried to assert that the Levites don't need to be the only line of priests, but that every tribe is important. And he watched fire come down and burn up the people who were offering strange fire, offering improper sacrifices. Caleb witnessed that. Caleb was there to witness the deaths of Moses and the death of Aaron and the death of Miriam. Moses dying because he struck that rock instead of speaking to it. He disobeyed God's word, and he lost his opportunity to enter that promised land. Caleb was a witness to these things. He was a witness, and he was probably an active participant then in the military campaigns that occurred. Just because they're wandering the wilderness that had entered the land of Canaan didn't mean that Israel was without conflict. They had lots of conflict in their time, and specifically we see the Amorites gave them a lot of flack. And there was actual combat that occurred. Caleb would have been involved in that battle. He had a sword, he had his spear, he had whatever his weapons were. He was engaged in all the life of Israel. He was a man who lived and experienced a lot of things. And then he gets to experience entering the land of Canaan. He is either the oldest or the second oldest man in all of Israel. He crosses the Jordan River. He watches the fall of Jericho. He sees the defeat at Ai and then the subsequent consequence that comes upon Achan and his family. He is a witness to God's faithfulness over these years, but also God's justice and God's holiness. And he's watching as these promises are being fulfilled left and right, and he's an active participant in all of it. If we were to, as the book of Joshua then goes along, we're going to be in the book of Joshua. If you want to get to Joshua 14, that's what we're going to pick up in Caleb's life. But in Joshua 12, as it gives a little bit of a synopsis of Joshua's conquest and the nation of Israel's conquest, starting at verse 7 of chapter 12, you could read through the various places that they conquered and then the list of kings. All in all, though, it ends, there were 31 kings that the united nation of Israel dispossessed and defeated and conquered. At least 31 battles just in the land of Canaan that Caleb would have probably been involved in to some extent. Now, he is much older at this point in time, and so he might not quite have been as active, but I do think he was involved, and you'll see why in a bit. So turn with me then to Joshua 14. Look at verse 6. This is after Joshua has kind of completed the bulk of the conquest that he is going to lead up. And so now it's going to be a disbursement of the tribes. They're going to get their allotments and land. And then each tribe is responsible for finishing the conquest. So the nation of Judah has its region, it's to clear it out. The nation of Benjamin has their region, they're to clear it out. As we get here to Joshua 14, we see Caleb having a conversation with his old buddy Joshua. Verse 6 says, Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, in Kadesh Barnea concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him word against it, as was in my heart. But my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. Now we get some perspective here. We know that when Caleb was sent to go spy out that land, he was a young man of only 40 years old. He's older than me, but he's still a young man at that day. At the age of 40, he went to spy it out. And we know there's at least 40 years of wandering, so we know he's at least 80 years old in this scenario. But the first thing that Caleb does in this conversation with Moses is he looks to the past. And he looks to the past, and he points to his past conviction that he had, that he demonstrated when they went to spy out that land. Because he points back to those events at Kadesh Barnea. He notes this, that Moses, who is the servant of the Lord, and he also says Moses, the man of God. He points to the fact of Moses' prime importance, and he's going to get back to the purpose he brings up Moses as this man who was a prophet, who made a declaration, made a promise. He's going to get to that promise in a bit. But look at the usage of the pronouns. He says this, Moses sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. He doesn't say us. He didn't say he sent the group of, he sent that group, you remember them, he sent me. He recognized that he had a very personal responsibility when it came to fulfilling this task. Moses tasked Caleb. By extension, I mean, from God. Like, essentially, he recognized that the Lord sent him to spy out this land. He took personal responsibility for it. And you can see it even more so. He says, I brought him the word again as it was in my heart. When Caleb went and he wandered up and down that land, he was taking note of everything. He was taking note of the cities, of the fortifications. He was taking note of the produce and the abundance of the land. And in Caleb's personal heart of hearts, he knew what ought to be done. He knew what needed to be said. He had purposed in his own heart, I mean, to kind of borrow a phrase from Daniel, that the nation of Israel could and would conquer this land with God's help. That was his personal conviction. And then he contrasts that, though, with the others. He says, but my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. He draws a stiff line, and I think even here we begin to see Caleb's courage. Caleb's courage, first of all, was in knowing that they could conquer that land. When he came back, his report was, we can go in there with the Lord's help. He's promised that we can do it. But Caleb also exhibited courage in being willing to stand on his own. Now, he had Joshua with him, and Joshua knows. Joshua was there for these events. He remembers as well. But Caleb was willing to stand alone. I think that's what he's drawing this point here. He didn't say, you and I decided in our hearts. He was speaking personally. I believe that even if Joshua, if we were in a hypothetical world, even if Joshua had sided with the 10, Caleb himself would still stand courageously for the Lord and still declare, this is the right way to go. And I'm not going to turn my back on that. I believe in God's promises. And so he has courage that comes from the Lord, but he has courage even to stand up against his peers, against other men who are respected in the community there of Israel. I mean, these weren't just like nobodies or lowlifes. These were individuals that Moses handpicked for this task. He was willing to stand up against them. And then he concludes it with this. He says, yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. I completely followed the Lord. Caleb recognized that his brothers and his close confidants and those men that he had been hunkered down with for all those weeks, week after week after week as they were going through the land, even those people, they were not following the Lord. Yet Caleb was going to follow him 100% all the way, no questions asked. I wholly followed the Lord my God. And it's a very personal note there. He recognizes his relationship to the Lord, that the Lord, Yahweh, is the only God that he is going to worship. I bring up that little point because look what Moses said, because now he gets that promise. He reminds Caleb of his past faithfulness. Now he's going to remind him of the past promise. He says, and Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. Moses' God was the Lord. When Moses spoke of the Lord, it was the Lord my God. And it's the same with Caleb. Caleb didn't say, I followed the Lord Moses' God, or I followed the Lord your God, Joshua. He's the Lord my God. And he even gets the commendation from Moses as well. The promise that because you wholly followed the Lord, You will inherit this land, and you will have it one day. Now, Caleb brings all this to mind because he wants to get to the present. He's looked at the past, he's looked at the promise, he's getting to the present here. Verse 10. He says, "And now, Joshua, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years since the time the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I am this day 85 years old." So now we get his exact age. We have 85-year-old Caleb. And 85-year-old Caleb is not looking to go skydiving. He has something else in mind, pointing once again to his courage and his unwavering trust in the Lord. Verse 11. He says, "I am still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming." Now, for those of you who are approaching 85 or perhaps beyond, I would venture to say that you would not say you possess the same strength that you did when you were 40. I know I don't possess the same strength I did when I was like 25. But here's Caleb asserting that he is still ready for active combat, active war. He said, "I'm ready for war, for going and coming." I mean, that's going out to battle and coming back from battle alive. He is ready to still be 100% engaged. He's not shying away from responsibility. He's not shying away from the call to conquer this land. At 85 years old, he says, "I am ready to continue the work that God has tasked us to do, Joshua. That God tasked us to do 40 years ago, or 45 years ago, when we first entered that land of Canaan. He called us to go through and to conquer it." And here's where we see, I think, Caleb's genuine courage and belief in God come to the forefront. Verse 12, he says, "So now, give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord said." Now, to refresh your minds on the Anakim here, I'm actually going to read from Numbers 13 to give you the actual report that came from the spies. So, Numbers 13, one more page, there it is. Starting in verse 25, this is the report. It says, "At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, 'We came to this land which you sent to us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan.' But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it.' Then the men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are.' So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And we saw there the Nephilim, the sons of Anak,' or the Anakim, 'who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them.'" Just without, we could go on, because the people, as the chapter goes on to 14, Caleb and Joshua and Moses assert the Lord will give them victory. But if we were to stop there, it almost looks like Caleb's confidence comes in their youngness and their vitality, and they can fight. But the thing that drove the other 10 to refuse to go in were these giant people, were these impressive armies. They were so monstrous and so strong that the Israelites didn't stand a chance. And this is with a group of young, fit, able-bodied individuals who are preparing are would be soldiers. The 40-year-old men are afraid of these Anakim, these Nephilim, these descendants of Anak. Fast forward 45 years. I can just see Caleb, ever since that day, has just been wanting not to prove the people wrong, not to prove a point. He has nothing to prove. There's no one around him that he can show off to. They're all dead. But I think he wants to prove that he was right about the Lord. And so here at 85 years old, he says, I want the hill country where those giants were. I want to see. He says this, it may be the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out as the Lord said. Caleb wasn't banking his success on his strength, his knowledge, his just abilities. He was basing it once again, like he did earlier, on the promise of the Lord. And he was willing to undertake a difficult task because he trusted in God's promise that he would fight for Israel on their behalf. And even in his old age, when he could have very easily and very justified taken a back seat, taken a breather, had his descendants, had the rest of the nation of Judah go in and clean it out, he still wanted to do great things, big things, courageous things for the Lord. Joshua blessed him, says, gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. And Hebron became then the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Caleb's life is, like our other two men, a life of faithfulness. But we see his faithfulness come out in doing courageous, great things for the Lord. He was courageous as a young man, standing up and speaking truth when the entire nation was against him. He was a courageous man in his old age, when he could have just hung up the sword, called it a day, and gone on. He still wanted to endeavor to accomplish what God had told him to do in the first place. And it's all because of the source of his courage. His source was found in the Lord himself. Now, I also bring up Caleb because I do want to bring up a more obscure individual, maybe a more true, secondary character. And that's the man Othniel. Now, if we go to Judges chapter 1, where I want you to turn with me, we kind of get a retelling of the events, of the tail end events of Joshua. Because as Joshua gets halfway through, then it goes through the allotments of the land and how the nations go and drive them out. Well, Judges 1 opens up with another telling of those campaigns. Judges 1. Judges 1, look at verse 8. We're looking at the nation of Judah and their conquest of the area. It says, the men of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. Afterward, the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who lived in the hill country, in the Negev, and in the lowland. And Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron, as in the city that Caleb was given. And they defeated Sheshai and Ahiman in Talmai. And then if we were to go over, we realize in verse 20, it says, Hebron was given to Caleb, as Moses said. He drove out from it the 3 sons of Anak. So those 3 Anakim, the people that Caleb said, if the Lord's with me, he'll give me the victory. Caleb successfully drove those 3 men out. He, not to, just borrow a phrase that gets misused, but he claimed that promise of God, and he went for it full tilt. He knew what God said. He knew what God had called him to do, and he trusted in the Lord. And even though he was not the youngest man in that battle by any means, even though he was probably not the most fit, even though he might have thought he was the man who trusted in the Lord and recognized that God is going to bring about the victory. God's going to bring about success in this endeavor. But I want to bring up Othniel Because after we get verse 10, where it talks about him defeating those three men, it says, from there, they went against the inhabitants of Debir. Debir is about 5-6 miles south of the city of Hebron. And Caleb said, he who attacks Kiriath Sefer, or Debir, and captures it, I will give him Achsah, my daughter, for a wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, and he gave him Achsah, his daughter, for a wife. We have here, there's this interesting relationship of who this Othniel character is. We have Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. Which means this, Caleb, when he went into the land of Canaan, had a brother who was younger than him, Kenaz, who obviously then had, who probably had a child. It's more likely that Othniel is a nephew of Caleb. Now, unless Caleb's brother was 20 years younger than him, he would have been one of the individuals who died in the wilderness. One of the people who decided to side against his brother's recommendation to go into the land of Canaan. And Othniel, I think, growing up, learned from the example of his uncle. Or I suppose it could be his brother if he's a really young brother. But he's at least 20 years younger than Caleb. And he looked up to Caleb. And he saw in Caleb a life of courage in following the Lord. And so when it came to conquering this city, yes, there was the prize of marriage that was there. And, you know, conquering the city is probably going to be the bride price he would have to pay, and it's going to be financially prudent. But I don't think he would have had the courage to go attack this city on his own or to lead the charge if it were not for the godly example that he saw in Caleb. A man who just prior took on the three Anakim, the three sons of Anak, the descendants that drove an entire nation into a frenzy and panic. Caleb trusted in the Lord and took his confidence there. And I think that got passed then on into his family. This Othniel, which shows up later in the book of Judges, he actually becomes the first judge that delivers the nation of Israel. So if we were to read Judges 3, we would see Othniel show up again. He was once again used by the Lord to do great things. And Othniel is one of the very few judges that really only has good things said about him. He's the first, and he's one of the best, as it were, morally upstanding men that God used to deliver the nation of Israel. And as we think of Caleb, not Joshua, think of Othniel, these are men who recognize that God wanted to use them. And even Caleb, he didn't take a retirement from serving the Lord. And frankly, he didn't even think there was a task that was too hard for him. He took courage in his God. And no matter what task was ahead of him, he knew that the Lord would bring him through it and the Lord would provide for him. I have to think of my own life. I'm obviously on the early spectrum of the example of Caleb. I'm not even as old as he was when he went into the land of Canaan as a spy yet. Still got a few years to go. But if I want to have a life of doing courageous things for God, it's one that's done each and every day. It's one that starts young, and it's a daily activity. Caleb, I believe, we don't see his name coming up in anything negative along the way, but I think he was faithful to the Lord. He wholly followed the Lord all his life. He said it himself that he did it. Moses said that about him. And even as Joshua was wrapping up the book, as that's being written, it said that Caleb received that inheritance because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. 3 times it said of Caleb that he 100% wholly followed him. And it manifested itself in a life that was well lived and used, I would venture to say, to his dying breath. Used to serve the Lord. Which brings me to ask these questions as we kind of wrap up here. Is this: what does God want to do with your life today? Whether you are young or you are old, God is still calling you to serve and to minister. There are still things that maybe God has placed on your heart that he wants you to do, ways in which you can reach out, ways in which you can encourage, ways in which you can disciple someone else. What does God want to do in your life? As a kind of a follow-up thing to think about, have you ruled out a ministry or ruled out something because it's too difficult for you? Has God placed a burden on your heart, but you have X, Y, Z reasons of why, you know what, I should leave that to someone else. Someone who's maybe a little bit younger. Someone who's a little more skilled, a little more qualified. Someone who just, knows their Bible a little bit better. I think too often we try to rationalize too much. I mean, it's good to be prepared, and there is a place where there's a definite place where we need preparation. We don't just jump in willy-nilly, just jump in without any sort of study of God's word, and we're going to try to do great things. There is a place for it, but we also don't want to make excuses for not following God's will. What does God want to do? Are you holding yourself back? Is there something that you're afraid to do? Are you finding your courage in the Lord? Or are you trying to find your courage in something else? Though he would live many years later, after Caleb, David recorded Psalm 27. And I'm going to just read some excerpts from Psalm 27 that reflect on David's courage in the Lord and David's focus. And I would venture to say that Caleb had a similar mindset in his life, and I trust that you would have one as well. Psalm 27, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an enemy encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise against me, yet I will be confident. One thing I have asked for, and that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. He will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. I'm going to jump down to the end of the passage. Verse 13. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. May you look to the Lord today for courage. And may we be men and women who live lives like Caleb, who courageously and confidently cling to God's promises and strive to do great things for him. Thank you again for joining. We've wrapped up another Bible time. Once again, if you have yet to sign up for Sunday, we would love to see you in person for our indoor service at 10 a.m. Otherwise, you can tune us online. And we'd also love to see you outside at 2:30 for our Valentine's Day focused service as an entire church body. And don't forget those Valentines. The kids will